All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast, coming to you from a Thursday. Yes, from a Thursday. We've got some scheduling rearrangements, so we're not coming in our normal Sunday time slot. So if you are looking for us on Sunday, here's a pre-recorded video to watch and listen to. So enjoy. But also, we didn't have a chance. If you caught our last episode 412, you saw that we kind of got cut off in our time in our discussion around the Steam machines, and so we wanted to, rather than push it back even further heading into Thanksgiving week here in the States, to get a show out while we still had some thoughts and momentum around Valve's Steam announcement. And along with that, we still have plenty of other news to talk about. We have the Game Awards that were announced, at least in terms of the nominees, and we have a nominee who removed themselves from the list of nominations. But we also, as we always do here, we've got some games to talk about as well. So I am your host, DBQ Hams. This is episode 413 for the Enough to Keep Going podcast. Whew. That's a heck of an intro, Talmaster. How are you doing, sir?
Very tired tonight. It's been a long week.
And it's not even over. Although I spent most of yesterday thinking that it was Thursday, or maybe just hoping that today was going to be Friday. So it would be over. But I got to say, I've been looking forward to this conversation because we did kind of cut it off. We didn't have the chance to get into it all. And so it's been a long week, but being here with you gentlemen is always energizing. So glad to have you here, Tao. Game Logic, as always, glad to be here. You're looking like you're trying to figure out some settings there or checking some levels. How are things going on your end?
Yeah, things are going fine. Things are different, but nothing too catastrophic here. No, I'm mainly looking up. I've written a lot about the Steam machine over the last week or so because of, as this episode is titled, because of many misconceptions and misassessments. So I've actually been going through my posts and bookmarks and trying to pull them up on my screen.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to keep you here on the mic because we're going to jump into our first segment, as we always do, with some of the new games or big games that we've been playing this week. We've all got 3 new games. Last week we ended the show talking about that we hadn't had a chance to play any of Call of Duty Black Ops 7. I downloaded it on my PC and then quickly realized that I do not have secure boot enabled. So rather than playing with my BIOS, I said, forget it. I just deleted it off my hard drive and played it on Xbox. So I've had a chance to play a little bit of Zombies, but I'm actually looking forward to hearing your impression because you are much more of a Call of Duty connoisseur, or at least have been over the years. And I do want to call out that the mode that I'm most interested in, the end game mode from the campaign, it was announced from Treyarch this week that they are unlocking it so you don't have to complete the campaign as of tomorrow, that you can just jump right into the PvE end game aspect. So with all of that set up, Game Logic, what parts of it, of this giant beast of Call of Duty, that have you been playing, and how's it compare? I mean, this is back-to-back Black Ops.
So before we get into it, I'm just interested. Tao, have you downloaded it and tried to play it on PC?
No, I'm not going to get it right now. I let my Game Pass wane, so I might like re-up for like a month or something maybe, and then try it out. But nothing right now.
So that's interesting from a consumer perspective,
right? The secure boot piece, or
the Game Pass versus like buying a piece, and like what happens like when that, because we've talked a lot about churn.
Sure. Yeah, especially with Game Pass increasing its pricing. Like,
yeah,
is it enough to move the needle to go out and purchase it, or are you just going to wait?
All right. So the secure boot piece, just a funky kind of like there's a part of me from a technical perspective that was sort of okay with it because notionally, and I think some of this is I've injected this into my own fiction, so I don't actually know if it's true. It's just like the things that I thought of when I heard about it without digging into it. And what I presume is that there's something that they're doing with anti-cheat that is trying to hook down to those levels of security and validate that people aren't trying to circumvent, right, the code at a very low level to get past anti-cheat.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. I looked it up. I mean, I appreciate your level of knowledge here. This was new to me, but if you've been a Call of Duty player, this was announced that it was coming and implemented in August, so that it required it. So if you have been playing Call of Duty and Black Ops 6 or that this is, or Warzone, this is not a surprise to you. It is much more for a consumer jumping in at an annual release than it is for somebody who's sticking with it and playing it on a regular basis.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that, because even if you like, yes, if you're a diehard, like I mean, like a dyed in the wool Call of Duty person, and you like played the betas, right? Because I mean, and you pay attention to all of the announcements and like find out what maps are coming early, like that. Like I think like maybe if you're that hardcore, then you would have known about this. But like anything less than that, this announcement could have easily gotten by you. And in fact, I don't know that the Call of Duty announcement resonated that loudly. It was more so that Battlefield was doing it. And so I think that caught people's attention because people were paying much more attention to Battlefield this year. And then when Call of Duty said it after that, then maybe some people paid attention. So shout out to Real and Nate for coming through the chat. Appreciate you. I know tonight is a very busy night. I know there are multiple podcasts going on, so I don't know if you have like all three podcasts pulled up on multiple monitors in your command center there, which wouldn't surprise me at all. But
Real Nate,
sure.
glad to have your comments as well, right? Real Nate says, literally, I just turned off Secure Boot because it was causing an issue a few months ago. And yeah. So, I think that this is... I just assumed that it was my ignorance, let alone a larger piece here. So
the first piece is that you could have missed the announcement. The second piece is that there are things that even if you caught the announcement that don't necessarily make sense. So the first thing is that concurrently along with this, Windows 10 went out of life cycle as far as like getting primary updates, right, in October, I think it was. And so there's been this push to move everyone to Windows 11. Now, here's the thing that kind of taps my butt about this whole thing. So I migrated all of my machines to Windows 11 in January of 2025 because I didn't want to have to, because I knew me and I was like, if you don't do it like over the holidays, you're going to just get busy and not do it. And then you're going to forget about it. And then you're going to have to do it at the last minute. And then there's going to be this whole learning curve and things that surprise you and all that stuff. And I was like, I don't know. So I migrated everything early, deliberately so. All of my machines, and my machines run a gamut of 2020, 2021 technology to 2024. All of them I was able to migrate to Windows 11. So here's my problem. Some of these requirements are reflected in Windows 11. So to me, it makes, if instinctively, I would think that if I had a machine that had been on Windows 10 that was able to successfully migrate to Windows 11, this should not have been an issue. However, it is an issue. My box that I migrated, like one of my machines that I migrated to Windows 11, which is running a AMD Ryzen 9 7950X. It is on I think it's on a B550 motherboard, I think. I don't keep the motherboard serial numbers in memory or model numbers. It's on 64 gigabytes of RAM and an RTX 4080. I was able to successfully migrate it to Windows 11, no problem. I didn't have to monkey around with it. Now, I have, in the course of moving GPUs around, I did have an extremely rare instance where you can have like a GPU BIOS that is not compatible with a motherboard BIOS. And I had that problem. And so that 4080 that's in there now is a GPU that I had to swap from another box because the 5080 I was trying to put in there didn't work. That all being said, I run Call of Duty and Call of Duty does not work. I mean, it boots and it tells you, you have to do these things to become compliant. Secure Boot is mystified if it's not something that you normally work with. It has like multiple configurable parameters in it that don't always equate to it's turned on. So there's enabled, then there's like 2 other settings that determine whether or not it's actually like in line with what Call of Duty Black Ops 7 is expecting. So I had to go through and dork with my settings 3 times and reboot. And then there's all types of
that's where I just like crashed out and said screw it, it's not worth my time.
And so for a lot of people, they're going to wind up, they're going to be encountering this for the first, like, thank goodness, like I'm not digging through the secure boot settings for the first time, right? I've had to dork with them because of dual booting and other things that dorking with this GPU card and other things that I've tried to, tinkering with my box. So, but for a person who's just a gamer who's on PC, and I often talk about how there's this demographic of gamer that's on PC that is not technically savvy, right? Like they got onto it because of they're a live streamer or they watch live streams or whatever. So you're going to have people running into this problem that is not like the norm for them. People who've literally never been in their BIOS before, right? So this is what you're asking of people for the annual, like, to a certain extent, there's absolutely a sliver of argument that this is kind of preposterous, right? That this is what people are being asked to play what is one of the biggest like gaming franchises.
Sure, right? Yeah, one of
the market
biggest releases in theory, but not necessarily in reality potentially anymore, but still significant.
And one that this year has a lot of competition. So it has Battlefield going on. There's extraction shooters are getting popular. They're actually breaking, in my opinion, they're piercing the veil, right? Like they've kind of historically been these things that have been thought of as like these seal clubbing, brutal experiences that are not for normals. And there are lots of them that are doing things through design that are making them approachable and palatable to people who just, don't like going in, to do PvP all the time.
Sure. I mean, our podcast last week we spent a whole lot of time on Arc Raiders. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, there's that friction. Then you get into the game. Things are pretty normal. I don't play the single player campaign anymore, so I haven't paid attention to that whole hoopla. I saw it, but I was kind of like, why would you put a barrier in front of people for them to get like? And I get it. Like, there's certain aspects of it that will probably sound fun from if you're playing it 4-player like co-op. But I'm like, culminating the campaign climax in this training wheel exercise to get into PvP. Like, I don't know that like entirely makes sense. So it's good to hear that they're doing away with aspects of it. Obviously, the thing that most people are talking about this year is that there's no more SBMM in the primary core multiplayer mode, which is actually what it's called now. So now you have core, hardcore, and then you have standard, which is funny because they're all like in different tabs and like again, if you're familiar with the Call of Duty paradigm, great. If you're not, like, how you should intuitively understand like the difference between core, hardcore, and standard, I don't know. And here's the thing, they give descriptions right in each of these tabs that are not plain speak, right? You read them and like I have to read them twice just to make sure like I'm absolutely clear on what it's saying. But I'm like, it should just say this has SBMM, this does not have SBMM. And if somebody needs to Google what SBMM is, then let them go Google it. But like it has this like ridiculously convoluted like $5 word explanation, and I'm like, what? So, at any rate, then in standard, so standard now is the SBMM mode, which also doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, if your whole point is that the mode without SBMM is now supposed to be your normal, why do you call the other one standard? And why do you use two terms like core and standard, which to a lot of people will mean the same thing, to mean different things?
So, right. Yeah. Right. You would think those are both baseline. Yeah.
So, and in some ways they are, right, for like a deep technical, like gamer Call of Duty nerd, but like, just don't, like, there's no need to do that. But at any rate, so there's core, there's hardcore, and there's standard. There is a bug, I think, in the menu system now where the way you normally take the quick play filter and click on your modes to put them into like, what it randomizes in, I think is bugged. Like, and for me on PC, you can't just click on it. You have to actually hit the R button first, and that brings up like the filter panel, and then you can click on your modes. So for the first couple days and the first several like matches, I was like, this thing is bugged. Like, what's going on? And so I was having to go in and click like the individual mode I wanted to play like each time. So like I would play team deathmatch, and then I would come back, and then I would play, I forget what it is, whatever the tag thing, kill confirmed, right? And then I would come in and I would select VIP. So each time I would select one mode instead of hitting the quick play. And so that's the other thing on standard. Now there is standard, but the only thing you can select in standard is mosh pit. So if you wanted to play standard with SBMM turned on, there is no option. Like, and you just wanted to play, like, you didn't want to play any of the objective-based stuff. You didn't want to play hard point or domination or all these modes where people go in and don't pay any attention to the objective. That's no longer an option. If you want to play with SBMM on, you can only go into SBMM and play Mosh Pit, which has a mixture of, free-for-all. In fact, I'm not sure if there's free-for-all in that mode. There's probably not, because then if you were in a party, you couldn't like not avoid free for all. So free for all, I think, is only in the core and hardcore modes. From a design perspective this year, I'm not absolutely certain that I'm happy with it, because I'm not absolutely certain that I'm not like imagining problems that aren't there. I feel like what has gone on with the, I'll just call it like the pixel size, right? Even though it's not a technically accurate term, but like the pixel size of like the character models when they're when they're like bad guys, is smaller. So it feels like when I go in, I feel like I feel like I'm playing Apex Legends, right? Like, we know on the show, I tend to not like Apex Legends because like the character models in the pip are like, I mean, to the extent that like, you don't in Apex Legends, you don't really see them. It's you float your cursor over them, and then you will see like their pip go off, and that will be much more prevalent than actually like seeing a person through your scope, unless you have a really like long distance scope. So that's kind of what I feel like here. It's like even at medium range engagements, like you can't discern the character against the background. Like you will see their pip, much more so than you actually see the character themselves. So I'm not too crazy about that. And then I feel like there's something going on with the character models and the texture maps where they just don't seem like they have as much fidelity. That one I'm not gonna raise a big stink about, because like I said, I don't know if I'm mind tricking myself into eye tricks or something, but I definitely, the color palette feels like it's subdued. Like, you go on to Express, and that is a positive that I will say. I do really like that we've had a return of a lot of like my favorite maps from like when I re-onboarded back to the Call of Duty series. So maps that were in there during Modern Warfare and Cold War are in there. Express is one of them. I cannot remember what the other one is off the top of my head. There's another like Cold War map that's in there. The yacht map is in there. So there's some good maps, I feel like, for this first launch. I'm sure they're going to bring in another set of favorites when season 1 actually launches. That's another thing that I don't like. I also, and maybe it was there before that, but I never caught it. Like, so in the past, what I remember was that if there was no sense in you turning on your double XP, they would block you from doing it. So mistakenly, without like really paying attention, I activated a double XP battle pass token. There's no battle pass right now. so I just blew that token. That's my fault for not paying attention, but still, there were things there that I felt like prevented you from doing that before. But yeah, I mean, other than it is Call of Duty, but there are some differences, and there are some things there that are not the same and not the norm that they've been since the Modern Warfare reboot. And I think that's why you're seeing so much of the game getting dragged online, on Steam reviews, in other places, is people aren't happy. And I think people aren't happy beyond just the normal, it's PvP, people play it a lot, the Destiny 2 type crowd that puts thousands of hours into the game but still grouses about it all the time. Like, there's that. Like, I recognize that when that happens. I don't think this is that.
Those Destiny 2 players had to go somewhere because they're not in Destiny anymore.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely some unhappiness, and it's not because weapons are nerfed. It's not because of Omni movement. It's not because of there's I'm putting this out as a preliminary comment for us to watch it, but this is as close to a Vanguard year as I've seen since Vanguard. So we'll just see how it goes and keep an eye on it.
So the one question I want to ask you is, with that kind of Vanguard reference, do you feel it's closer? Where does it land with kind of the truncated development of Modern Warfare 3, right? We had that same kind of Modern Warfare 3 came out right after Modern Warfare 2. It was potentially supposed to be DLC, became a full-on launch. Where do you feel like this is landing in that space too?
So for me personally, which is the only thing I can comment on, I kind of shrugged off the Modern Warfare 3. I know there was a lot of clowning on that game because of the single player campaign, but I'm firmly in that mode now where people don't play Call of Duty for the single player campaign. I don't. There's a niche that does. Sure, great. Those people are unhappy and salty. Fine. But the vast majority of it, the thing that moves billions of dollars, is those of us who are playing it for multiplayer. And there was a certain nicety towards in Modern Warfare 3 when all of the weapons, I'd say 88% of the weapons were the weapons that you'd had in Modern Warfare 2. And so you benefited from that, right? You had to re-earn some stuff over. And of course, they did the whole prestige thing, which I think initially graded people a lot the wrong way, but eventually I think kind of grew on people and people were okay with it. But there was because remember, I've said for these PvP games and these games as a service, I think a thing that a lot of kind of traditional lifelong gamers miss when they say, and in fact, I myself used to also say, that nobody finds value in those, and it's just geedunk, and it's just. I'm like, no. What people find value in is that they invest 40 hours in a game, and then there's a thing that they are in the game, right? There's a representation of their investment, and there's continuing return on that for the things that they've done. If you lived in Destiny 2 for years and years and years, you had a set of adventures, you had lived a campaign, you had built a fire team, you had and yes, I get it. Destiny 2, there's raggedy edges on that because they took weapons away and Vault is okay, fine, right? But the point is that when you invest in that online persona, and that becomes sort of like a mini virtual profession, and that's who you are. We have people in Destiny 2 who were Titans, and that's who they were, right? And I'm using Destiny 2 as an example, but that applies to a lot of other games as well. That's what people find rewarding from that. And so to a certain extent, that was kind of replicated in the Modern Warfare 3 turn. Call of Duty was one that kind of always skirted a little bit away from that. Sometimes I would complain, and sometimes I would say, it kind of, chaps that every year I got to start all over again, right? And you just unlock these things, you just got your diamond skins, you blah 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 blah, and oh, here we go, starting at ground zero. And when you get embedded in it, a lot of people get used to that, right? And a lot of people will actually find reward in that. I'm like, oh, fine, take my stuff away, I'll just get my KD right and run it again. But there was some nicety to that Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3 bump, to the extent that I was like, you know what, if they're going to go this route, because remember, there's always the rumor that they're going to move it to more of a continuing living game, and there aren't going to be these annual installments, and you're just going to get packs, right? To extent it's going to, that it would become more of a kind of a Destiny 2 type of thing, I would say. There was a certainty that I was like, okay, I think I'm fine with that. If I always have some number of weapon platforms that I've always unlocked and always have, I'm fine with that, right? That concept of continuity, which Call of Duty didn't have.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think Ghostface Killer, thanks for dropping in tonight. Good to have you here as well. Right, there's been that. I think we're past the point of thinking of Call of Duty as something that would go without an annual release, because rather than just this ongoing piece, I don't know that the revenue model is such that it would sustain it. And I think Town Master's example here of I don't have Game Pass anymore, I'm not in any rush, like whether or not coming from someone who used to be a rather consistent first person shooter Call of Duty player, I think that is an interesting reflection of some of the market as well.
It's kind of funny because as we've been doing this podcast throughout the years, I see now that myself and Game Logic have flipped, where I'm kind of going scorched earth with Xbox right now, and kind of Microsoft almost in general. And I'm just kind of like, I got to step away a little bit, especially since I can play on PC now too, and if I wanted to, I can do Xbox Game Pass on PC, obviously. So I can always come back to it with that respect, and I'll probably stick with PC gaming pretty much as the majority of my gaming going forward. With Switch is always there for me, or whatever Nintendo has out at the time. So that's my console gaming. That's and we'll talk about obviously the Steam stuff, how that's going to factor in possibly in the future. In a little bit here. But I just wanted to comment that it was kind of funny that we've switched positions now, and Game Logic's the Call of Duty bro, and I've kind of stepped back a little. I mean, I'd like to play it because, and this is I guess the question for you, Game Logic, as far as gameplay and like the setting of the game, it's kind of like near future-ish, right? Almost like I think Black Ops 3 was, and what was the other one? Advanced Warfare.
Yeah, it's not. It's kind of weird to see just how much they're like cutting that line. Like I was just about to say, no, it's completely conventional. It like the setting is kind of like neo future, but everything's grounded. It's all military weapons, modern present day military weapons and stuff. However, there is one little thing. And I was just about to say, yeah, but people are running around in exoskeletons and like doing 50-foot leaps and things like that. But there is wall running in the game. So there's this little tiny edge where like they're toying with, were people really that angry about Infinite Warfare? I'm like, yes, people were angry about Infinite Warfare. Don't do that. So, but there is wall running, and there's, I don't think your jump is that, but there's one level that I know, like the floor drops out, right, of certain areas. Actually, two levels that do that. And you've got to, so if you come through there at that moment, like if you're sprinting through at that moment, that like the floor drops out, like you got to make a jump right at an angle sometimes to get to, to continue on, or or else like turn around. But yeah,
I think in theory, like game world wise, it's set 2035 or 10 years after Black Ops 2, whenever Black Ops 2 ended. So
I just gotta say, I actually like the wall running and the exosuit stuff back in 3 and Infinite Warfare, but that was just me. I know like the majority of people didn't like that kind of stuff, and that was kind of the time too when Titanfall had first come out, Titanfall 1 and 2. So that was kind of one of those, whether it was coincidence or whatever you want to call it, those type of games were kind of coming out in tangent. So, but I actually enjoyed Black Ops 3, which had a lot of that, had the bigger jumps because you had the exosuits and a little bit of wall running and stuff like that. And I really loved it. And I was kind of sad when they went away from it. I think they started going back to the modern day stuff after that. So that when I first saw Black Ops 7, I was like, oh, they're going back to that. But then I don't know. Like I said, I've been kind of going backing away a little bit for now. So we'll see.
I think that's interesting. And this is a topic for another show. But as we come around to the 20th anniversary of the Xbox 360, to hear Tao say he's going scorched earth on Microsoft, and who was a diehard Xbox 360 Microsoft person at one point in time. Like, it goes back to that idea of what's left for people to hang on to Microsoft for, which is a different topic.
Yeah, and there's just to set the stage before we get there. There's a weird sliver of daylight, right? Like I'm actually the same as Tao is. I don't call it scorched. Like, look, if a good game shows up on Xbox, I will go play it. But on PC, I am religious now about never opening that Xbox app. And I have a full intention to repurchase all those games on Steam because I do not want to be bothered like with that Xbox app. And I play on the console, quite honestly. But I am also like very not happy with Windows 11 and with a lot of the things that they're doing on Windows 11. And like the moment an escape route is opened via Steam OS, if that becomes like a really viable thing, there's a very good chance that I'll right now I'm planning. I mean, we're gonna get to Steam machines, but right now I'm planning on buying 2 Steam machines next year to replace PCs that I don't want to upgrade because I don't want to deal with Windows 11 at volume anymore.
Okay, well, that is teeing us up for the big discussion tonight. So I'm just going to do a quick hit, and Tao, I'll let you decide where you're going to land with the other two. But since we have made that transition, I started playing Deadpool VR. So this is by Twisted Pixel of Splosion Man, Missplosion Man on Meta Quest or Quest. A couple levels in, it's I'll talk more about it next week, I guess, is the reality. Like, it's fun. I'm not laughing as much as I hoped I would be, but I'm really enjoying the gameplay in terms of kind of kinetic, fast-paced shooting with a little bit of platforming. So, Tao, you picked up quite an opposite game of a single-player VR game to take on Where the Winds Meet, which is a NetEase... Is it an MMO?
Yes, yeah, it's an MMO published by NetEase and developed by Everstone Studios, which I was going to look up if they had done anything else, but I didn't get a chance to before the show. But yeah, so I actually played a little bit of it. I think I just like one night last weekend, and I was thinking about talking about it on last week's show, but I was like, I want to play a little bit more, and I wasn't even sure if I was going to jump back into it. But then I was talking with my one friend. He was like all about it. Like he just kept hyping it up. So like, oh, I'll give it a try again. Because the problem with, so it's like you're in kind of ancient China, so kind of like Wushu era, excuse me. And so it's a lot of, gameplay is very reminiscent of kind of like Souls and, Elden Ring, those kind of games where there's a lot of dodging, a lot of parrying. And just I can never get the parries right, and it seems like that's like the most powerful thing, in this game too. Like obviously when you parry something, I think it's like that in a lot of those games. You can do those quick, the quick hits, right away once you do the quick, a good parry, and it's a lot more powerful, your hits and stuff like that. So I was like, man, I just can't do it. Like I don't know. Maybe it's because it's an MMO. Obviously, you're playing with a bunch of other people on the screen too, and there's lag and stuff like that. But I just couldn't do it. But then he was telling me, and I know people may rag on me for this, but there's a parry assist in the game, which I didn't realize. And I think it talks about it like at the beginning when you're kind of going through the tutorial kind of first little area, and I must have like clicked off of it, or just I wasn't paying attention when I was kind of going through it, and I turned it off. But he told me about it. I was like, oh, okay, so let me go back and turn it on. So I was like, okay, so it's not too bad now. So basically, you have 3 chances to parry, and you basically the parry is like kind of like on a meter. So you hit those 3 chances, and then it has to like regen. So then after that, like after you do those 3. You have to do it on your own. So I was like, all right, let me try it out. So I did it, and yeah, it's a lot better. So basically it like slows down the attacks when they're coming at you, and it kind of tells you when to parry. So you get, like I said, you get 3 chances. And once you get past those 3 chances, you kind of just on your own. So it's a lot better. There's normal enemies, so it's not as, unforgiving as like, the Dark Souls and Elden Ring and stuff. So, you can just fight like normal guys a lot of the times too, and not like just bosses everywhere or anything like that. So that's kind of nice too. But yeah, I'm just having, kind of a good time with it. And I'll talk more about it, I think, too, on the next show, just so we can get onto the next new stuff. But so far, so good. Now that I have the parry assist.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's circle back around to Steam. and the hardware announcements, which we talked about and recapped last Sunday on episode 412 in terms of the Steam controller and the Steam frame with their VR or stream headset, and also the Steam machines. So this is we kind of covered a little bit in here last week in terms of what they are, but we didn't really get much into the analysis of what they mean and where they kind of set within the marketplace. So Game Logic, I know you said you've been writing a whole lot about this, and so I'm going to turn the mic back over to you as you finish taking a sip so that you are all ready and teed up to jump on your soapbox.
Yeah, and we should definitely take a free license to kind of meander around. I'll start with an interesting topic because most of my things are topical. They're not in any kind of like chronological or logical order. One of the things I want to talk about is there's a lot of discussion going around about Half-Life 3. And really Portal 3. And even the kind of funny games daily guys, like there were parts of them that were like, oh, Half-Life 3, like, they need to launch it with this and blah, and they'll sell blah blah blah. Like, so this gets into a lot of topical areas, but I'll just start with the notion of the game itself. And maybe some of the business aspects. We have been in a post-killer app console launch space
for a long time.
Yes. We're like, there used to be a formula, right? For those of us who have been studying the industry for a very long time. You launched with a racing game that was a technological demo. You launched with either in more modern times like a first-person shooter, or before Halo, when shooters really became viable, like flagship titles for consoles, a platformer. You would launch with a big RPG, and then you'd launch with like sports games, right? And maybe an action adventure game. But like there was always this notion in industry conversation about you launching with kind of the big five. And at least one of those had to be the killer app. It had to be the reason why people felt like they needed to use the console. It had to be a Morrowind or a Halo, or some other thing that made people go out and buy the console. It had to be, card game wise, it needed to be a Forza or it needed to be Gran Turismo. But like when you look back over the last couple of console generations, we have some revisionist history. I think there's a notion that like the PlayStation 4 had like a Bonga launch lineup, and I'm like, no, it didn't. There were a bunch of indie games that were on there that if you were coming from PC, you had already played. We have the Series X, Series S that launched without Halo. The Nintendo Switch launched with Breath of the Wild, but the Nintendo Switch 2 didn't. I mean, I will argue against the conventional wisdom that Mario Kart was like yes, it has a 92% attach rate or whatever, but like it is nowhere in the conversation. No one talks about Mario Kart World, like outside of the launch window.
Yeah, I think, one of the things where that idea of the necessity of a game to launch with really started to lose steam for me, at no pun intended, of when we deal with backwards compatible, right? Like we are not moving from one isolated generation to the next. Like if I can plug my game in and it runs better or looks better, like the benefit of hardware is that, versus it's the graphics card upgrade versus a brand new box type of thing.
And that is a great analogy. Console players who are not PC players constantly talk about that. Oh, you need a great game to launch with the new. No, we don't. Like most of one of the hugest values that PC gamers get out of picking up a new GPU is they promptly load all of their past games, which had been giving them performance problems, or where they hadn't been able to ratchet it up to like max settings, and that is their test group of games. And now we can start getting into, and again, this is why people are doing the misassessments, because they're thinking about this like a console. This is a Steam machine. It already has literally a backlog catalog of thousands of titles that are available. And if if you're already a Steam user, which now I'll start treading a little bit on the who is this for, this is for lots of different groups of salt and pepper, right? There is no one massive group addressable market or demo that this is for. It's not PlayStation. Next PlayStation comes out, who is it for? It's for all the people who are already on PlayStation. It's for the 80 million, 100 million, 120 million people who are already on PlayStation, and the people who are thinking about defecting from a console that isn't satisfying them, such as Xbox, which has been going on for 2 generations now. People are defecting. We'll get into this a little bit more, and people are going to defect next time around too, right? So, so that's the first one of the first primary groups this is for. It's for people who are already embedded in Steam and who look at this and they say, regardless of the cost, who cares? Because I already have a library of 300, 400, 500 games. So it doesn't need Half-Life 3. Like that notion that this needs a big title. No, it doesn't. What are you talking about? It absolutely does not. If it launches, great. But I mean, Valve has proven one thing is, and maybe I don't always give them credit for it because we don't talk about them so much with regards to hardware. I often talk about Nintendo as like the honey badger of the industry. This is why you get the Switch 2 with no big killer app launching, because they're the honey badger of the industry. Nintendo's just going to do whatever the heck it is that it wants to do, right? But I think in this particular play, Valve is doing the same thing. They're like, we don't need to launch. So if they launch it, great. But I've just seen some people that are very, very super bullish that they're going to announce Half-Life 3. And I'm like, maybe, but the causality of that, they're going to announce it because they have to in order to sell this thing, they absolutely don't.
Yeah, I think all they'd have to, if you want to make the argument that it needs something to play, all Steam has to do is put out one of their seasonal sales at the same time that this launches, and people who are new to the platform in terms of Steam OS pop up the store and see all these sales. That's the equivalent. This is a completely different. It has the potential to be a completely different type of space. I think the question, it seems to, as somebody myself who really enjoys the Steam Deck, who just got done talking about, I may be able to figure out how to deal with my BIOS and take care of secure boot, but it also isn't worth my time. No, it's not worth my time. I don't care enough about Call of Duty to do that. For somebody who finds themselves in this type of situation, does a Steam machine, does it answer the question of, I don't have to dig around in the settings nearly as much, right? I still have the option. I can play around with my Steam Deck settings a ton if I wanted to, or I could just play. And if the Steam machine can offer that, I think it has a potential. It finds a space in a market that is evolving and changing as Microsoft is moving in that direction of, all indicators show that it's going to be a similar kind of set-top PC box as they talk about what their next generation is as well. So I'm trying to tee you up here, Game Logic, for keep going here.
I wanted to see if Tao had anything he wanted to interject so far.
Oh, as you guys are talking, I was just kind of thinking too, as much as the Steam Deck gets a lot of praise. I mean, if you look at the background numbers, it's not a huge number of sales number wise. It's not out there, and it doesn't need to be. And that's what I don't think that's what they've ever really wanted. Well, I mean, obviously their business, they want to sell, a boatload of, Steam Decks, but I think in the long run, it's not really what they were looking for. They were just kind of, they wanted to make this machine, get it out there for, people, enthusiasts that are already, using their systems, and, same thing with, the Steam controller and even the Vive or Frame. Sorry, I was thinking of the Vive. It was the first one. It's kind of the same thing with that. I'm sure the Vive. I mean, even in their statistics, they're like, you see that the Quest is the number one VR headset, or I think it still is. I know it was for the longest time. And they could have just been, okay, we'll just give up on VR and we're done with that. But no, they're bringing out the Frame now, and it can do standalone and still plug into your PC, so it's doing a couple different things. And I have thoughts on the Steam Machine, but I'll save those for later when we're kind of talking about who's it for. Because at first I thought it was for me, but then I'm like, I don't know. But I still might get one, so it depends on the pricing too. But yeah, I just think I kind of nail it on the head. They're just kind of doing their own thing, just like Nintendo would. So it seems to be working for them. Like they're not backing down, and obviously they're making buku bucks with Steam, just in general, the Steam store and all that. So I think if they release the Steam Machine, I would say they probably wait a little bit before they throw a sale out there. Although it might make sense too that they'll just drop it both at the same time, and they'll get a lot of purchases there too.
Well, I think, and I was saying, the first two categories of people that I think that's for, it's first of all for the people who already have a vast Steam library. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you're coming to the Steam Machine and you have no Steam library at all, you need merely spend $100 to, like, if you spend $100, like you're gonna have like enough to keep you busy for months. If you spend north of that, you've got enough to keep you busy for a year. And again, we're talking about kind of back catalog titles, but like if you're coming to PC, there's tons of stuff you haven't played. Like there's just a vast field of games and genres that you're not even aware of, right? So, Tao, you open up a good segue. This whole notion of like how big is the Steam Machine expected to be, and you're absolutely right. We think that there's only been about 5 million Steam Decks sold. So let's talk a little bit about Valve's profile. Valve is a company of about 350 people that makes about $8 to $10 billion a year. And I'm just reading a tweet that I put out earlier this week. This should be taken into context when making, in parentheses, wackadoodle assessments about the addressable market of the Steam Machine, Valve's sales expectations, and what it would look like and sound like if there was an effort underfoot for them to scale up massively. There's been no indication that they're scaling up. Their hardware department is like 41 people. There was a brief rumor on NeoGAF recent era that they were doing some massive scaling up, and that didn't go anywhere. That didn't prove itself out. They have about 181 people on games. I suspect that is a crew that is predominantly occupied now with optimization of games to run on the Steam Machine, as well as things that they have toe dips in, because there are games where they provide like support or they're not the primary developer on, but they're helping with development. And again, there's been no indication that that's like and so there's a certain drum beat and a certain voice track that goes on with things out in the industry. We hear all the time. We've gotten the word now that like half the reason that games get announced right at SGF and other places is because it's basically an advertisement for resources, for human capital, right? It's to get developers interested who are like, oh, well, let me go to the career site and check out, the recs that they have open, so they can start ramping up the team. Now, admittedly, Valve would go about doing that in a lot more secrecy, but there's been no indication of like that type of activity going on. Could 181 people pull it off in 18 years of development? Maybe. But you probably don't want, I mean, we talk all the time about games that have really long development cycles and how you can tell because you go into level 1 and it looks like a game from 10 years ago. And then the second level loads, all of a sudden it looks like a UE5 game. So I just don't think that it's practical that they've either had a big, huge ramp up for a development activity or that they're doing some significant ramp up of the hardware department. And Tao, I absolutely agree. And I'll turn the mic over to you guys so you can talk about like the comparison of like what is this thing competing with. They do not have the console guys who are like comparing this to the PlayStation 5 and comparing this to the PlayStation 6 and comparing it to the Xbox. Like they have zero intention of selling 40 million of these things, right? So it is not competing with mainstream consoles. My own prediction is that they're going to sell 10 to 15 million of these things, but I think that's a fairly lofty sales target. Like I'm sure if they sell less than that, it'll be fine. And the last thing I'll mention is, again, the reason this thing is being made is because they had telemetry that said 20% of our Steam Deck user base is taking this thing and plugging it into an external monitor. So their addressable market, as far as they know, as far as they have certainty of, that caused them to get off their butt and build this thing in the first place was like 800,000 people. Right. So it's again, there I don't know how you would go from that telemetry to some expectation that you were going to sell units to compete with like the PlayStation 5 or even the Xbox.
No, right? And I don't know that again, Valve is in such a unique spot because they have, not only do they have that telemetry and the data to show about how many users are plugging it in, they also have the data to show how many people, where those users are spending their time versus a Steam Deck versus their existing PC. And even if they don't sell a whole lot of units, you're still in their marketplace and in their infrastructure where they are making the vast majority of their money, right? This is not, they're not going to sell it in like an old school console space of a loss leader, but they are also, as long as you're playing PC games, chances are your Valve is getting a cut. So
it's interesting that you mentioned that they won't like so in, I can't remember, in maybe a 2024 interview or something, but Newell is on record as saying, hey, when we chose the pricing for the Steam Deck, it was a challenging price for us. So, and he said that their objective was to get to get these things out the gate, not to sell like bonga sales, but to get at least enough momentum on that it would start the cycle, right? That it would generate, it would kind of self-perpetuate. So that initial price, so there has not been confirmation that they sold it at a loss, but there is strong belief that it was, it was, if they sold it at a profit, it was very, very, very super thin margins at the outset. I'm sure that improved later on, and that's why you saw a Steam Deck OLED, and that's why you saw the prices shift on the SKUs. But at least initially out the gate, like they did take it on the chin in some manner. And there's belief and indicators that they're not planning on doing that with the Steam machine, but I don't know.
I think going back to the business side too, you're mentioning like the over a little under 400 employees there, which I always forget. Like it's not a huge company. Like you think, 400, close to 400 is a lot of people, yeah. But compared to some of these other companies, where they have thousands, churning out these games, it's not that much. And maybe they are ramping up, and it's maybe just contractors, and this game logic, and from being on the business side, a lot of time contractors get in, just to do their thing, and then they're gone. So it could be that could be part of the the blow up of employees. It's not going to be core employees. It's going to be all these contractors they bring in. And just on the Steam machine itself, it's like, well, I don't want to get into that yet because for who it is, but if you have any other comments on anything, go
ahead. No, I'm fine if we get into kind of who this is for. Inate's comment, Steam Deck 2 OLED. Well, I'll save that for later because I think there's an article that's pertinent to that. So yeah, I'm fine getting into kind of who this.
Yeah,
is
let's
for.
get into it because I think Nate's other comment about the Steam machine pricing was going to be real interesting, especially today with a new story around Valve saying that it's going to be priced closer to the PC market than a console market.
So I'll start there. So I've tried to find the original quote, like not the one if they mentioned something else today, I haven't seen that. But when they did the initial reveal, there are some people who have quoted that. I've tried to find the verbiage of the original quote. I can't find it. What I will say is my belief is that when they say that, they're not talking about a entry level micro mini ATX type of machine that you would go order from Alienware, right? What I think they're talking about is I think they're talking about the mini PC category. And when you look around the mini PC category, at the high end you have NUX, right, which is the reference design spec that came from Intel that they sold to Asus. And those things scale, like those things have gaming laptop parts in them and therefore run similar prices. it will actually scale up to, I would call them just below small form factor sizes, where they will have like the smallest versions of full scale desktop GPUs in them. So those are not those aren't mini PCs, right? I mean, those are, I mean, I guess they are, but they're pre-built that are very close to almost COTS appliances. Asus makes a few, MSI makes a few. You can go in and see these things in Best Buy. They come in non-standard cases. It's not something you're going to break open and upgrade, right? And again, when you dig around inside of them, a lot of them are laptop parts. So they will have laptop CPUs. They will have SODIMMs for RAM, and very often their GPUs will be laptop parts. Mini PCs are like the core group of mini PCs are actually lower end than that, and those are things that will typically, like, you go to Ace Magic's website and you will see these boxes, and these will be things that will typically run between like $600 and $899, and they are not your. They will be AMD APUs, so CPU GPU together. GPU is not discrete, and again, SODIMMs for RAM, right? NVMe drives. If you're lucky, they'll have a few compartments so you can break off the side panel. I used to have an Ace Magic one that, again, doesn't come in a standard type of case. But these are things that are lower, like smaller than like mini ITX and ITX, things that you would typically find in a small form factor box. They're definitely smaller than like mini ATX. So these are not enthusiast DIY type of configurations. They are something less than that. And so they aren't like $1,500 boxes in general, right, in the thick part of the market. And so when they say closer to PC prices, I think those are the PCs they're talking about, and that's where I get, something in the ballpark of like $600 to $900. And we could talk a little bit more about pricing, but I'll stop there and let you guys go.
Tyler, your mic is totally on, so I'm curious what you're as you bump into it.
I thought I had it off, so I turned it back off. No, yeah, I mean, it's. I think I remember those mini tower or mini boxes that you talk about. I never had one, but I know there was a couple people, a couple coworkers that had a previous job that had some. And yeah, there's basically it looked totally like the Steam machine. It was just a little box, basically. With all the I think the one guy I knew, you could, at least for the RAM, you can upgrade a little bit. It wasn't integrated, but pretty much everything else was, it was all on one motherboard or one, system board, a smaller one. But just personally, like I was saying before, like initially I was thinking, oh yeah, this would be perfect because I'm trying to get away from Xbox, and I could throw one of these on my TV, and which like I said, I still might. But for the games I'm playing now, like a lot of shooters and stuff, like it's not going to work on the Steam OS because of the anti-cheat. Maybe that'll be fixed, or that'll change in the future. But just me personally, like I'm kind of like torn between it. Like I said, it's going to really depend on the price, and looking at the specs. I mean, they're fine. Like and me, and I think probably the majority of people too out there. Graphics, obviously, graphics matter to a lot of people, and it's nice when you do have full 4K a capable machine. But for the most part, most people are just throw it on their TV. They just want to sit on and play it. And that's, even though I do have this a pretty decent PC now, but I'm still playing on my Xbox, and sometimes even one of my not even the Xbox Series, it's just the regular Xbox One X that I had from back a few years ago. And I played the Switch. Obviously, it's not super powerful, but I enjoy it for what it is. So I think, while it probably, I don't know if it's going to sell as much as you're thinking, but I got a feeling it's especially initially too, it's going to be a fairly big seller, probably more than the Steam Deck. I would say it'd be more than the Steam Deck for sure. Whether it's that high, I don't know.
So earlier in the show, Tao, you mentioned that at first you thought this was for you, and now you're not so sure. Is that because of as you just said, right? The games you're playing are not going to run on Steam OS.
Right. Yeah. So like Fortnite and even Battlefield and Call of Duty's. Well, I guess not Call of Duty will. Well, maybe not because I can't even run that on Steam Deck. I don't believe. Maybe you can, but I can't remember. But I never tried because I had it on my PC anyways. But those type of games, I definitely wouldn't be able to play. So yeah, and that's just like I said, that's just me personally. So I think the majority of people would get, a lot out of it just because there's so much on Steam.
Yeah, and I think that's that's the next point, maybe to kind of talk about that split in demographic. And just before we go into that, I brought up like this is the Ace Magic. Like, I mean, I didn't have this specific model; I had an older SKU. But that's of course I'm tapping on the image and not on the actual webpage. So you could see. I mean, this is like their super discount pricing as we're going into the holiday season. But like this thing runs at $850, and it has a high end APU, right? So a Ryzen 9. And this is when it has 64 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD. That's not what this thing has, right? So it's going to be a 16 gigabyte box. If I break it even because it has 16 gigabytes and a 2 terabyte SSD, you can see the representative pricing here at $799. So this is what I think they mean when they're talking about similar, like priced similarly to, is this type of machine, because that's essentially what the specs of the Steam machine are, right? This is something it's more in line with than a big DIY box with plenty of cooling and and space to upgrade. But the demographic you mentioned, Tao, is I mean, and this goes up again to like a reason why they don't plan on selling 40 million of these things. Now if they surmount that problem, and they are working on surmounting that problem, and they have, but like originally when the Steam Deck came out, like none of those multiplayer, and the big thing is kernel level anti-cheat, right? Kernel level anti-cheat doesn't work on Steam OS because there is no Windows kernel for it to hook to. So and initially none of those things worked, and now some of those things work, right? And they are continuing to actively work on trying to surmount that problem. But I think largely when we talk about who this thing is for, I don't think this thing is for that crowd yet. I don't think this is a box yet for you, for the Fortnite crowd, for the Destiny 2 crowd, for the Battlefront crowd. Like this is for the people, I think, predominantly who are interested in diving deep into, mostly single player games from their Steam library. Maybe some multiplayer things, right? Because I guess there are tons of racing games that have multiplayer on them that you can play on Steam Deck. And there are some things I play on Steam Deck that I get surprised by, and I'm like, what? I don't know that I would ever like play, that are PvP games. So I think they're working on those things, but I don't think it's for those masses, right? For the multiplayer stuff. Now, the interesting thing when we talk about what does this thing compete against, should they surmount that problem, which I suspect that they will do in the first initial years of launching this thing, now you're going to have a competitive problem if you're another platform, because we have a lot of people who are, as you mentioned, still on Xbox Ones, still on PlayStation 4s. You have, like, I talk about these live streamers who are like, they start on console, they get told, hey, you should just get a PC, and like your stream looks like crap, you should just get a PC and stream better with better image quality. So they do that, they get a GPU in it because they don't know any better, they don't know that they don't need one to, like, for a streaming box, but they get one anyway. And then they've got this gaming capable thing, and then they start streaming from it, initially still playing on their console, but then somebody says, hey, have you thought about just playing on PC? And then they make that conversion, and then they find out, oh, I could be more accurate in Fortnite. Oh, I get more frames like in these PvP games. Oh, I want to be like Shroud and Ninja, right? And so there's this whole kind of evolution that they go through. Well, and then their followers, right, grab onto those coattails. This is a box for maybe some people in that demographic because they don't necessarily need a 4080, a 5080, a 4090, a 5090, but they just need something that's a skosh better than a console. In certain applications, not necessarily universally. And so they could wind up finding this appealing, particularly when we talk about the later extent to which this is going to go, which is that you're going to have these entry level things. Then, as Enate mentions, you're going to get Steam Machine 2, you're going to get refurbs, right? You're going to get discounts and sales and things just like we saw with Steam Deck. So, those kind of secondary drum beats, right, in the market this creates, could have ripples.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting kind of short-term future to envision, right? Oh, yes, here Down Under. Glad you can join us on not a Monday, but a Friday.
A second Monday.
That's right. But that idea of if that space moves beyond where it's now able to run on SteamOS, that really is a market disruptor for Windows, potentially in a gaming space, for not only the streaming reasons, but just for the casual user as well. That it also, changes licensing and price points. And if you're running something that you don't need all the other Microsoft bloat that comes with installing Windows, and
I like how you had to modify that on the fly because this is a family-friendly show.
Maybe I did. Right, but we had that same conversation around the ROG Ally X in terms of why is Microsoft Teams and everything. Like, Microsoft has clearly not figured out how to make a streamlined, portable, handheld space for Windows. And if SteamOS can figure out their piece in terms of the competitive gameplay, those are two competitors coming at it from different angles, but it's certainly whoever breaks that barrier first really has a disruptor piece.
So you've tread into an area that I've been very bullish on, and I don't often get into like my social media beef, but I'm going to get into a little bit here because I had a very strident argument with
Please do.
Like, again, one of these notions that I think is a severe misassessment and misunderstanding of the market. I was a little flabbergasted that this person actually said it because I think most people get it at this point. But the person said everyone has to have a phone and a computer. I'm like, I'm not sure if you haven't been paying attention for the last decade, but we are very much so now in the post-PC world. We actually used to use that term a lot in online, right, journalism and blogging. We are in the post-PC time. But people do not need a computer. People do not need a general-purpose, multifunction Windows laptop, right? Most people today now get by on their tablet, or on their phone, rather, and many people
We've almost moved out of the tablet space as well.
Yeah. But we still have a lot of people who buy iPads, right, with a keyboard, because they feel that's just as effective or more so even than a laptop. We have a lot of people who buy Chromebooks. And then you have a big part of market displacement that has happened. Again, even though, I'm specifically talking about Windows PC now, where they will buy Macs. And I'm like, they're not buying Macs to play games, right? So, again, there's been this huge displacement. Like, there's nowhere in the world that anybody needs a desktop PC that runs Windows now. And so the primary reason people need a Windows PC now is for gaming, because that is still kind of the central platform ecosystem from which most gaming springs. So now you have this weird thing where Steam comes along and displaces Windows, right? Removes your need for it and still enables gaming. And these aren't Linux games that are running on the Steam Machine, the Steam Deck, although some of them are. There hasn't been. I think when the Steam Deck came along, there was this belief that maybe it would spawn like this revolution, right, in encouraging developers to make more Linux games. It hasn't, not at scale. They're just still making Windows games, but now people are enabled to play that on SteamOS. And so, yes, like the thing this thing really, really, really competes about, and the reason, in my belief, the reason why Microsoft is responding the way that they are is because of the threat of Steam. Because if Steam comes along and becomes a thing, if SteamOS becomes along and becomes a thing, it removes the last reason why most people would have a need for a desktop Windows PC. And that is a space that they can't lose. That is a space they are desperate to protect. So then you go to the console conversation. So if that's true, the console that this thing is the biggest threat to is the upcoming Xbox. Because if the upcoming Xbox is this PC console hybrid that runs Windows, like real Windows, not like baby Windows, like the Xbox has been running on. And I use the term baby. I don't use the term baby Windows as an insult.
It's not. Yeah, no,
it's the super efficient version of Windows, right? Without all the bloatware.
Yeah, stripped down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But stripped down so much to the point that it's really not Windows, right? So this thing is going to be a little stripped down too, but it's going to be Windows, is what we believe. So if that box comes along, and yes, yay verily, it enables you to have access to Steam and Epic and GOG. But essentially what the world becomes, what the value prop becomes, is Microsoft is saying, hey, we've been working on this thing for console gamers, really, that we're going to offer to you that's like super powerful and gives you access to all these other storefronts and the Windows Store, right? So 4 like major storefronts where you're going to be able to install launchers and all this kind of stuff. And the person's going to look at that and they're going to say, okay, but the Steam machine gives me access to Steam. I get that you guys are offering me other stuff on PC, but the Steam machine gives me access to Steam, which is 70 to 85% of the market. Right? So great, you're offering me like 15% value prop, right? In these other storefronts. And Steam is doing it without forcing me to take on the baggage of Windows and charge me an additional $400 for it. Right? Over like, again, I'm just throwing that price out. So
no, but I think that's exactly right. And like Joe says in the chat here, right? Like your point of Microsoft needing to hold on to that market space because of, they need to push into there because they want to hold on to that, whether that's, as Joe said, with the Microsoft bloat and all the other functionality. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of how necessary that really is once you're in a casual consumer, not even casual, but once you're outside of a corporate office space, how much do you need a Windows machine to do everything that you can do in terms of communication and media consumption?
Yeah, and I mean, I would DBQ, I would even be more aggressive about like it's just gaming, because like if for my media consumption now, I use an Apple TV.
Sure. No, I think the gaming piece is right. And I think one of I don't remember where I heard it, but I'm not going to take credit for it, is, as you were talking about Steam being 80% of the market, like I'm sure Microsoft would love to make the case that that's a monopoly, but that also opens up a big old door around Microsoft as well. And so that's they're not going to unring that, but they're not going to ring that bell.
Yeah, and I can't remember. Well, there was a recent survey, I want to say it was. I can't remember who put it out, but somebody put out a survey where like 60-something% of developers came back saying that, yes, we think Steam is a monopoly.
Yep, that's where I think that came in. Yeah, that was probably 2 weeks ago or so that it was talking about. Yeah.
But unfortunately, that industry cell like also didn't put out the exact question that they asked. So the impression I got back from the answer was they were not saying Steam is a monopoly and takes advantage of developers and, blah, blah. Like, I didn't get that. I got the sense of they're a monopoly because they're like the only game in town. And like if you're going to put out a PC game, you have to put it out on Steam. I talked about this. I won't get into this in deep detail, but you're an economist, DBQ, so you get it. Like, I talked about this a lot during the acquisition. I said, like monopolies are a thing when there's a deliberate malicious intent to be anti-competitive. There are such things as monopolies that are not illegal. There are things such as natural monopolies that just happen. Like nobody did anything. Like you could argue that Google search is a natural monopoly. Let's take off the table the whole exclusivity deal with the iPhone, because quite frankly, Google was a near monopoly in search before the iPhone ever came along. They just had become the thing that people preferred to use. And so they were competitive, and they kind of became a natural monopoly. Like, there are geographic monopolies. There are several categories and flavors of monopolies that are not necessarily anti-competitive. So, my feeling is Steam is just that. They just were first to arrive. They make a good product, and without being manipulative and predatory, they're just the place that people prefer to go, and you can't really like hold any of that against the company.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right in that, right? Like they haven't been anti-competitive of trying to exclude someone out of the market space. It just, they have continued to thrive in that market, even when other competitors, I mean, we've seen every publisher try and then many have moved away from launching their own marketplaces, right? Like we've also seen in the Epic Apple lawsuits how much money Epic has spent trying to give away free games to bring people into that space. So yeah, I guess so many other pieces here where, like, in terms of what this looks like, what the timing looks like, what the price point looks like, how much. I'm sure we'll be talking about this a whole lot more. We're coming up to 75 minutes here. I want to give a chance to see if anybody else, if we want to take this conversation anywhere further, if we want to keep going with certain things that we haven't had a chance to cover yet, or if we want to kind of wrap this up here in a little bit as well. I also want to say thanks for hey Brett, thanks for joining us, jumping in here as well. So lots of good comments and chatter in the chat for even this being a Thursday versus a Sunday. So glad to have everyone here.
Yeah, I do want to hit this one other point, and I'll also turn it over to Tal to see if he has anything else. But I do want to hit this one other point of, again, now I would slow the roll on the freaking out of like, oh, this thing isn't going to be competitive against a console. No, nobody cares. Steam doesn't care. Valve doesn't care. Like, they don't. That's not the problem. However, what I would say is the Trojan horse on this is kind of this comment, and this comes from Larian's publishing director, obviously, behind Baldur's Gate 3. Valve creates an entry point for living room PCs. The console beating Steam machines will follow, argues Baldur's Gate 3's publishing director. So there's been much ado about like, this thing is not going to, the specs, hobble it, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, guys, like, it's PC. So what's going to happen is they're going to put this thing out. I think that the tech refresh cycle on this will be faster than we saw on the Steam Deck. I don't think we're going to hear the same thing on this that we heard on the Steam Deck. I could be wrong, but I don't think we're going to hear, we don't want to update the Steam machine until there's a technological leap that really makes it like a huge evolutionary change. That's been what has been breaking the Steam machine. And I think that's a problem because of the level of miniaturization that's needed for the Steam Deck. I don't think you're going to have that problem on the Steam machine. I think at worst, we're going to see a 3-year upgrade cycle on this. It could be quicker. And so what I think will happen is, and it could be TikTok. Like, what it could be is we put this thing out, we let it get traction. 2 years, we put out a Steam Machine Pro, right, or whatever, with upgraded specs. And then you get like an upgrade cycle of that SKU and an upgrade cycle of the other 2 SKUs. But there's going to be another Steam Machine Uber, right, beyond what they're deploying. And I think that will get here, maybe not super fast, but fast. And I think it will be, and I think this is what, the publishing director is saying, like, if this thing kicks off like a revolution of like this small form factor box that you can put in your living room that gives you access to your Steam library, and that thing gets traction, then, what you could see thereafter is Valve capitalizing on that and pushing another upgraded SKU. Now you have a thing deploying on the market that could be competitive spec to spec with other products. And if they've solved the simplification problem, which quite honestly they have, like I haven't been in the desktop mode of my Steam Deck for at least months, if not years. Literally the only thing I do to them now is I go to that settings menu to do a manual check for an update and pull down the update and install it. But other than that, I don't go in to dork with it. So Like if they get it down to that level of flattened wrinkle, then then you do have something that's vying for living room space.
Tao, any other final thoughts? Well, at least final thoughts for tonight. We're going to be definitely talking about this as more information comes out, as we get to the release time in 2026. But for this evening,
I had a question actually, because when the original Steam, because there were Steam machines before, right? Correct? If I'm not wrong, but those weren't built by Valve, correct? Those are third-party machines.
they were branded.
Those are
Steam
what?
machines. Yep.
Yeah, were those Windows? Those are Windows machines, right?
No,
they
they were
weren't.
running.
They were
go
They
ahead.
were.
They were running Steam. When that failed, a lot of them said, we're still going to put these things out, but we're going to put Windows on it. So I had an Alienware Alpha 1, which was a super small form factor. Like it was, I mean, it looked like one of these mini PCs, right? It was really small, but it had laptop parts in it. And what Alienware said is like, hey, we're not selling the Steam version of this, or Steam was taking too long to get Steam OS ready. And they said, we're going to put these things at Best Buy and we're just going to put Windows on them. So they put them in Best Buy and sold them for like $100, $150 more than they were going to sell the Steam boxes for.
Okay, and they didn't, and this was before the Steam Deck, right? That was before
this
Steam
was
Deck, wasn't
mid
This is
teens.
2015. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay, 2015. Okay, so yeah, so the Steam OS wasn't even. I mean, it was probably a twinkle in somebody's eye at that point, if not like rudimentary.
Yeah, they had big picture mode at that
OS.
point.
Yes.
That was as close as they came.
And that's one thing I want to correct. There's a lot of revisionist history going around saying Steam Big Picture Mode has been around since 2012. It was absolutely there on the first original Steam machines.
Right.
That's why they went to market with them in the first. Not you. I know you didn't misconstrue that. But
No. Yeah. No. Yeah. No, I was just wondering, because I had that was a question I was gonna pose last week or on Sunday. I just didn't get a chance to, just because I wanted to. I was just trying to follow the history basically of their machines, and because that was around the same time they had. Because I wasn't really into PC gaming at that point, or not really, so I wasn't really following it too much. But that's when they had the original Steam controller too, right? Around that same time.
Yeah. It launched along with it. So the big difference.
We also had the Steam Link at that point as well.
Yes. Yeah. So the big difference with this go to market is that last time around you would go to the page with Steam machines on it. They all look different. Like you didn't have this assurance. If there was nothing like the Steam Deck Verified program, you didn't have the assurance. Like the only thing we'd seen was Windows. You didn't have the assurance that all of these things were going to work and they were all going to work the same. It wasn't a COTS device like the Steam Deck is. This time around. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I think the Steam Deck really informed how they're approaching this. Yep.
Yes. So I've thrown a lot of slander at people comparing this to consoles. Yes, there are some console-like behaviors and go-to-market tactics around this. It is not a console. It is not going out to compete with consoles, at least here at launch. But there are some things that are similar, which is that this is much more so a COTS appliance. This is much more so like buying a cell phone, right? This is much more so like buying an iPhone. Like it's a box. Yes, there are two different SKUs, but they all work the same. They all run the same. You're going to McDonald's, right? If you go and buy a Big Mac in Oklahoma, it's the same Big Mac that you get in Rhode Island, right? And that's kind of what this thing is offering. And that's why it is vastly different than how they were trying to go to market with the Steam machines the last time around. Last time around, they were trying to go to market like they were a Windows box, and that's not what they're doing this time.
Yeah, that's I think that's an important distinction here, because it then allows not only for developers to kind of have a target to benchmark against, which they've done for the Steam Deck, but now they can do it on the Steam machine as well. It doesn't prevent other people, and Valve has already said this, right? Like if other people want to, here's our specs. If they want to create other boxes that are at least this and continue to go upwards, that's great, because then it still provides, if the Steam machine is a low end benchmark, it's still anything else that's going to have that verification is still going to, it meets that aspect. It makes the usability function of that. And they've came out and said it on the announcement date, is that in addition to Steam Deck verified, you're going to have a Steam machine verified check and kind of scale just like you do.
And a Steam frame verified.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Tao, I'm sorry. I had a question for you. When you said physically connects to your PC, were you comparing it to the MetaQuest and its link cable, or were you saying Steam Frame has that too?
I was talking about the Steam Frame. Yeah.
Okay. And have you actually seen that? Because I've been looking for that and I haven't seen that.
That it can actually connect to a PC
Over a wire, a physical connection. I thought the only thing that I've seen is
I've only seen the dongle as well.
Oh, I could have been mistaken then. Yeah, I thought it had a physical connection too. I thought I saw somewhere. Maybe I misinterpreted when I was reading it. Yeah, I saw the dongle too, but for some reason I thought they had an actual. You could do it physically, but maybe you can't.
No. I want it to have. I want there to be a tether cable that they come out with because I want high performance and I don't want to have to think or worry about latency if I play like a high end. Like if I go in and I want to play Half-Life Alyx, right? I don't want MetaQuest level performance. Like I want Valve Index level performance. So
yeah, because even looking on the page here, it doesn't really show like any other kind of connection other than the expansion port when I'm looking at the spec.
Yeah,
and that's here.
That's been my suspicion is that a dongle or some type of transceiver will plug into that expansion port, but it hasn't been announced yet. But we will definitely keep an eye out for it.
Okay, gentlemen, let's move on to we got the Game Award nominations. We can talk about this as much as we want to, but we're going to definitely talk about it more once the Game Awards actually happen and we get some winners. Before that, just because Brap and Nate, glad you both have been playing Dispatch. I thought we might see a little more Dispatch in the Game Awards, but I finished my second playthrough as well. So if the three of us or anybody else want to do a little side conversation around how their Dispatch game turned out, I'd be glad and down for that. So definitely, even last night after playing through the second time, I almost picked it up on PlayStation just to have a clean run and create another story. But I love those characters. Just like I know Game Logic loves Claire Obscura's characters and has picked that game up on multiple platforms. So let's start there with Claire Obscura really coming in strong in the Game Award nominations.
Yeah, I want to ask you, do you want to go through the categories or do you want to hit these issues that we have in the news articles?
I think let's hit the issues in the news article. I mean, everybody can read the categories. I think if there are things in the categories that you want to call out because they feel like either so glad that something got recognized or that something got missed, I think we can totally talk about that. I don't know that like combing through the categories for the sake of a recap. Let's pull it out for the sake of time and also for added value of what we have to contribute within that space. How does that sound?
Yeah, no, that's good. And so I think this is a good topic, right, to kind of pull the thread on. And so it's this notion of like what is an indie and how it impacts where these things wind up in award categories. And then I think you have a certain uniqueness with Expedition 33 this year as well. Mm-hmm. So I was talking to Brap earlier this week, and we were talking about, back in the day when like indies first became a thing. And I think the notion of what an indie is has existed time immemorial, right? Like back in the days of shareware, where there were no restrictions on distributing games, there were absolutely such a thing as like an indie. But as in the rise of AAA gaming and the alignment of constellations around the platform owners, that has become a thing. And so
the modern indie game aspect really feels it coincides with the kind of success of, as we're talking about Steam, right? That you get to like Indie Game the movie and talking about a few things like Super Meat Boy, and you get like mid to late 2000s where the term indie comes in. So I know I interrupted you there. Go ahead and continue.
No. I know you're a student of this stuff, so please feel free to jump in. And so we had this term indie, which I think in its inception, like you said, in the early 2000s, we ascribed as a label in a very kind of sterile academic clinical approach that said this applies to any game that is self-published, right? That does not have like the traditional publisher. I think over time we have loosened our grip on that, and it has become synonymous with budget and scale, and most times fidelity of the implementation. And there's been a little bit of a loose scoshness of the publisher relationship. But when you look at the indie category this year, you have a mix. And I know people harp on Expedition 33 and all of the help it got from Kepler, but I'm like, okay, Ball Pit is in there too. It is published by Devolver Digital. You have games that show up in the indie categories that were published by Annapurna. There's one other indie game in the category this year that also has a publisher. So like we've walked away from that concept of that strictly clinical academic, definition for some time now. I agree that Expedition 33 is a thing, right? And one of the biggest indicators I point to, like, look, I try not to take anything. First of all, this is my game of the year, so I agree. There's a mischaracterization when people say, "Oh, it only took 33 people to make this game." It did not only take 33 people. You look at the YouTube videos of the recording of the soundtrack; they are on a soundstage. Booking time at a soundstage costs money. It is not free. That is not something that I guarantee you gets booked and done by a team of 33 people, like already paying real estate on a castle in France. Right? So, these guys, I don't want to say that they had help, but like they benefited from being able to lean on a publisher. Now they're not owned by the publisher, right? So, like, again, there's caveats and differences, and like, Brap and I always say, like, we need to talk about these nuances. We need to not like flatten out the wrinkles, right, and smooth out all the ripples in an effort to have like a simplified conversation for the lowest common denominator, right? It is still an indie. Admittedly, it is not as much of an indie as a game that's made by two people out of a garage, So what does that conversation mean, and what should that look like?
Is that a question for us, or is that?
Yes,
I mean, I think
that's a kickover.
I think I think the way you parse that is really important, because I've seen dialogue out there of an indie game as a feel, just like this Polygon article talks about, versus the difference between indie as something that doesn't feel high end, being different than being an independent studio, right? Like there's for so long within the gaming space, like so long as in 15 years, we've treated the term indie as almost a genre, where, right, like it is an indie game. It may exist in other genres as well, but one of its subgenres is an indie game. Oftentimes it's been pixelated. Oftentimes it has, harkened back to previous generations in terms of its graphic style, or its play style, while it's also tried to push things forward. And then you get, there have been other indie projects and studios that have, but nothing has been as big and as kind of graphics pushing that I can think of in recent terms as Expedition 33. And I think in some ways it kind of blows some of that out of the water, in part, right? Like the fact that we have an independent studio running UE5 and really pushing at that, and having, the dialogue around, this is a great grab to pick that Braps up here in terms of historically, I've considered in a game that doesn't feel AAA and pushes creative boundaries, as an indie. And I think that's a good way to describe it. It also makes it harder to quantify, because how you describe that may be different than how I describe that. And both can be very legitimate. And I think it is an interesting, it is, I'm going to make a cop out here and say that this in some ways only is meaningful when we get into award season, when we're trying to box things into categories for the sake of of awards, that the success of an indie game, whether it's a big AAA experience indie game like Expedition 33 or last year's indie game that nobody objected to, Balatro, like both of those can be good for the industry, and both of those are great for the developer and the studio that did it. How important it is to have to wrestle with what this indie idea is outside of December and January, when we're looking at Game Awards and, DICE or BAFTA or, Golden Joysticks, whatever award we want to go with, and Game of the Years, how valuable is that? And that's I think that's where I said it's potentially a cop out, because but I also wonder if it's if we're artificially making these boxes for games as well.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. Look, console generations didn't exist before. That is an artificial construct that we made, right? That the media made. Manufacturers didn't really think about it that way. So, yeah, I will say, I feel like, so I'll enter into evidence in one argument. We don't have to pursue it all in its entirety tonight. I will enter into evidence. So I think there's another place where the conversation comes out, and this is a fight that Innate and I typically have, or at least I'll call it an arm wrestle, where people will say, Expedition 33 is proof that you don't have to have like a 200-person size team and a $300 million budget to make a great game. And I will contend, no, you don't have to, but it certainly helps. and what I will say is, yes, that's true. From an opportunity perspective, there is an opportunity for games to be pursued on that model and have them come out good. But I also want to inject that if I go to the Call of Duty team of 1,500 people and I create 500 teams of 30 people, I will not get 500 Expedition 33s. I'll get 2 or 3. And I'll get a bunch of other games that got canceled, that don't get greenlit, that never get a design doc written, right? That, wind up in the circular file somewhere, because that's game development, right? And there's tons of failure for, every one of the gems that we get. I mean, that's software development in general, quite frankly. So I don't think it's a model for the entire industry to convert to, but I think it's proof of its, of its potential. What I will say, the other thing is, I feel like there's a part where we say it's not really an indie, or it doesn't really count if they had help, right? If they have a Kepler, right? Because we have that party, waging that argument as well. But I will say, in a certain context, I think there's a argument that actually that's more important than indie, because I actually think what's more important for the industry is that publishers who have resources should actually champion and invest in small indie studios and risk mitigate for them and give them support so that they can deliver things that are greater than the sum of their parts, that allows them to punch above the belt, and less of the go off and make your game on your own and absorb the risk on your own in its entirety, and show me that you can sell that thing. And then when you do your second one, then maybe I'll think about investing, and maybe I'll think about giving you a Game Pass deal, and maybe I think about making yours I think what really needs to help, versus a lot of the other dogma and rhetoric that goes around the gaming conversation, that there actually needs to be a greater push for publishers that have some safety, right? Extending that, and placing some more independent studios under that umbrella, at least to help them get their first game out.
I would love if that is the result of Expedition 33 pushing at this definition and kind of really challenging people to think about what it is. And, Hero Down Under's comments here make a whole lot of sense, and fit right in with this as well, in terms of, it took 5 years for Sandfall, and it is an anomaly, and it's to be celebrated as well. But hopefully, a takeaway for publishers who see this as a success is to be looking for the next one of these, right? Publishers are always good at looking for the next one. Doesn't mean they always land it. They but I think that hopefully that is something that the industry would be better off if people are looking for the next one of these, people that have the funding, rather than greenlighting and fast tracking Call of Duty 7, Call of Duty, Black Ops 8, right here.
Or Concord.
Yeah, right. I mean, let's chase that trend of supporting small studios that are coming up with creative ideas and pushing at things, rather than chasing trends of extraction shooters, live service models, battle royales. Name your industry trend that has fizzled out as big publishers have thrown darts at that wall rather than making bets in a lot of small places. And unfortunately, I think the idea of what EA had with EA Originals and a number of those games in their support space, I'd be shocked to see that stick around after the PIF, bringing EA private. Tao, Game Logic and I have been on here. You got any thoughts? You want to jump in, prove us wrong?
No, I mean, I had the same kind of line of thought that you were thinking, DB, with because of the award shows, that's coming up soon. Will we be talking about it? But I was thinking more specifically on Clair Obscura, if it hadn't been the commercial success, because a lot of stuff has been critical, obviously, in the past, and it's not commercially successful also. But if it hadn't had that commercial success, will we be talking about this? Because it would just be another indie. It would be just another indie title at that point, correct? Like, unless I'm wrong, but I think because it's been such a big hit, and you can kind of compare it to like movies where it's a small, and Game Logic makes I guess good points too. Like, yeah, I did have some extra, and other people are saying, yeah, it has this extra income that came in, or pushing, backing, whatever you want to call it. But if you compare it to like like a movie that is super small and it blows up, I mean, it's the same thing, but people still call that an independent movie and stuff like that. So I mean, why is it any different for a game? And obviously game budgets can be huge, like that's a fact even for independent studios. But and then you have something like Ball Pits, what's super small, probably only a few people. I don't know what the exact number of developers were on that one, but all these other games that are on here. But yeah, I just like I said, I was kind of thinking the same line, just more specific on Clair Obscur itself.
All right, gentlemen, we have hit we've blown past our 90 minutes. We are into the we're not quite at we need 2 VHS tapes for our movie yet, but we're continuing to push at our podcast length here. But I'm so glad that we've had this conversation. We'll definitely talk more about the Game Awards and actually categories in general as we hit more Game of the Year. Game Awards is kind of the kickoff, but we get others that are here. I think one of the places that anybody listening to this and whether you're with us here in the chat or you're listening to this later, I would encourage you, if this is an interesting conversation to you, I would encourage you to go to Indie Game of the Year, which is Game of the Year Awards. And it is a whole, they've got an award show coming out in December that highlights very different. The Indie Game Awards is simply just that. Indie Game Awards GG.gg, coming December 18th. You get big aspects in terms of Game of the Year, but you also get just like we've seen at Summer Game Fest time, we get African Indie Game Award, New Zealand Australian Bite Size Game, Black Voices in Gaming, Latin American Gaming, Debut Game, Emotional Impact. And so if the conversation around indie game space is interesting for you, to check out those games. Like Claire Obscura is there, along with all kinds of other games, many of which I know about and many which I needed to go look up. And so if the idea of supporting indie studios and creative ideas coming from that space is something that is interesting to you, this is a great kind of one-shot way to look at some of what's being seen as kind of cream of the crop of this year. Gentlemen, any other final thoughts before we wrap up for the night?
The only other news hit that I want to mention, because you brought it up when you mentioned PIF in the buyout of EA and taking them private, is for racing fans, no F1 next year, which I am severely salty about. Supposedly there will be paid DLC to take your F1 25, and I suspect just download the new rosters and teams for F1 26. It will be paid. So, there's that. I feel like that's an indication that we're already starting to see some of the impact of the PIF thing. I'm not, being a person who buys F1 every year, not happy about that.
I mean, this is, as Hero Down Under just said, right? If FC did this, I think we've had conversations around if Madden would do this, right? Like how much of it is as an update versus an actual real game, new game. So it'll be curious to see how successful that is as well.
I hear you, Hero. My fear that gets invoked when you bring that up is that Codemasters tried to change engine. They tried to change it with EA WRC 24. They made a UE5 game. It was horrible. The other consideration of what they might be doing, because it's EA. So my other fear is that they're going to try and force them to use Frostbite. None of those things are good, in my opinion, for Codemasters and the F1 series. Like,
yeah.
So I either try to make them do Frostbite or UE. I think it'll be more than a year before we get another good F1 game if they're trying to make them do that.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen, what a show for an off night. We were definitely not off. We were on tonight, and so was everybody else here in the comments. Hero Down Under, Nate, Brap, Joe. Let's see who else we had here. Ghostface Killer.
Ghostface
there with us. Yep. All right. So glad to have you all here. And if you are catching us, if you are looking for us on Sunday and finding the recorded episode from this Thursday, congratulations. We'll be back. Don't worry. Join in. So, for myself, DBQ Hams, this has been episode 413. Game Logic, thanks for coordinating us tonight. Thanks for helping organize a lot of good conversation. Towmaster, I really am going to be curious to see where you go with pushing away Microsoft and Xbox. And I love that coming into the end of this year and thinking about what this looks like in terms of gameplay coming out of from your area moving forward.
Yes, superlatives will be interesting this year, I think.
That might warrant another special episode.
I think so. Or multiple categories of the hive of villainous scum, are most disappointing and all the other negative game categories. But yes, so we are getting close to that time of year here on Enough to Keep Going, where we do, rather than taking these artificial constructs of game categories, which we just talked about here with indie games, we come at our end of the year show with superlatives. in terms of a variety of different things. Sometimes they're sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're most of the time they're positive. And so that will be coming at you usually sometime around mid-December. And we'll talk more about what that schedule looks like coming up. But again, it's a great time. Actually, given the beautiful and really great conversations that we've had throughout the year with our chat and everybody who's been pretty consistent, and even those who have just stopped by, I'd love to throw some type of shared Google Doc out there with our categories and allow the community to join in and do something with that idea of sharing some of the superlatives. Maybe not all of the 12 categories or however many we get to in our, again, we usually do this as a 2-night show. Sometimes it's back to back, sometimes it's week over week, but I'd love to get some community engagement there as well. So that's plenty more to talk about. Any other final thoughts here as I keep milking our podcast as we're coming up closer to the 2-hour mark? All right, gentlemen. Thank you again, Game Logic, Townmaster, and myself, DPQ Hams. We'll be back with you next week. So until that time, play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to yourself. Good night, everybody.